Hello and welcome to an introduction to data formats in Universal Platform. In this video we'll be looking how data formats can be used to move data between various data entities in the platform. In this case we will be using sales data. Now this could be data that's generated from an application, data that we receive from a data queue, or for the purpose of the video I've generated some sales data and stored it on a Excel spreadsheet that we will be reading from. This data will then be moved and normalized to a few tables that are sitting on a SQL database, as you can see here. During this training we will be covering 4 major sections in the platform. The first section will be showing you how to access the data. In this case we will need to get access to a file system where the spreadsheet is stored, and we will save this as a storage location. We will also be showing you how we get access to a database in order to work with the tables in that database. We will create the data model for this project. The data model includes all data entities that we will be working with in this project. In this case, the data model will include the spreadsheet, which has the sales data in it, and it will include the 4 tables that we will be moving the data to. We will then look at data formats. Data formats is a way that we move the data between the various data entities. In this case, it will be the way in which we map the data from the sales data entity to the various tables in the database. And lastly, we will look at the pipeline. And this really is the flow of this project. So at a starting point, we will be getting the sales data from the storage location. The second step would be to read the data from that spreadsheet. Third step would be to map the data as we would have designed it in the data format. And lastly, we would save that data to the database. Now, in order for the platform to work with various data entities, the first thing it needs is access to these entities. So in this example, we will need access to the storage location where the Excel spreadsheet is located. And we will also need access to the database where these various tables are situated. So let's start with that. We're sitting in the interface manager, and we'll move to file systems in order to give the platform access to the file system where the spreadsheet is located. So I'll click on file systems. Now I've already given this one a name, and I'll show you how simple it is to set that up. We'll move into UP training. You can see I'd given it the name there, UP training. And we simply need to give it the location of the file system. Now because this, for demonstration purposes, is sitting on the local system here, it is simply c:\UP training. So it's sitting on my local drive, and that's where the spreadsheet is stored. If this was on a network, you'd give it a network path. And if it had any type of security, you could include some user credentials here. So it's really simple to set up. If I move back to file systems, you'll see it's sitting here. If I was to add a new one, I'd simply click add, and I'd include that location for the file system. Moving across to databases, I'll click on databases here. Now it will need access to a database. I've created one as before over here called UP training. If I was to add a new one, I would simply click on the add button here. But let's have a look at what's sitting in UP training. There's the name that I gave it. And the only information I needed was a connection string. So this connection string will give us the server and database names over here, and then give us the first database location, or the default location. that it will start at, and it has my username and password sitting in the connection string. So that's how simple it is to set up a connection to the database. The platform will then relate to this database using the UP training name we've given it over here. So back to Interface Manager, move back to Data Formats, and just open the one we're on. Move over to Format. We'll be coming back to this one, by the way, to have a look at how we do these links shortly. Right, so just recapping here, we've got a spreadsheet. We've given the platform access to that location, which is sitting on the C drive under UP training. And we have access to the database by using a connection string. The database is sitting with these 4 tables on it. And if I go over and look at that database, I have it over here. I have 4 tables. There they are there: customer, product, sales, and salesperson. They're empty at the moment, but I'd created them earlier as part of the normalization that I'll be doing to that sales data. The next step is to include all these data entities in the data model of the platform. So we will move across to Data Manager. We'll go to Data Models, and I'll create a new model so you can see how easy this is to do. We'll give it a name. We'll call it Training for Data Formats. We'll save that and move across to the model. Now we have options here to add an entity manually. This could be used if you were needing to access data that might have been generated from a query. So you might have result values there, 1 or 2 result values that you want to use in the process of the platform that are not actually sitting on a database as a table or as a file anywhere, and then you could create those manually. An easier way, if we are sitting with tables or spreadsheets or anything like that, is that we are able to generate them automatically by accessing them through the data model. So I'll click on the generate here, and we're going to generate a CSV schema for that spreadsheet. So I'll click on CSV schema. The location we had called UP training, storage location we had it in, and we had it in a folder called sales. We'll click on get schema, and we'll see there's only one file there at the moment, and it's the sales data file that we looked at. If I click on that, you'll notice that we have a number of, well, these are all the column names, which will be our headers. We're happy that that's what we were looking for. We'll click add, and that will generate a data entity. If we click on there, we'll be able to see that the attributes are all now included in the system. There are a number of options here, like constraints, etc., which we'll go through in a little while. Next, we will generate the data entities from the SQL database. So I'll click generate again. I'll generate a database schema. It's in the UP training database. I'll click on get schema. Now in this case there is only 4 tables on the UP training database, so that makes it easy for me. I can simply select everything we have here. You'll see the column headers there listed. So I'm selecting all the tables that are sitting there, and I'll click add. Now that we have all the data entities in our data model, the platform is now ready to work with these. So we can now start mapping the various parts of these data entities to each other through using data formats. So I'm going to move across to my interface manager, data formats. You'll see the one we created earlier. It's called training 2. And I'm going to run through this step by step. I will recreate it just to show you. As much as it looks quite complicated, it's actually really quite simple. So we'll move back to data formats and create a new one. And we'll give it a name, and we'll call it Training for Data Formats. Now what's important here is you'll notice we have a source and a target data model. Now for us, the source is the spreadsheet data entity and the target are the SQL databases. We have them both sitting in the same data model at the moment because we're not working with many data entities, so that was fine. But if you're working on with a lot of data entities, you could have your data model split. So all your source data could be in one area, or perhaps all your storage data in one and your database data sitting in a different data model. Ours are both in the same data model. And the data model we called was Training for Data Formats. Training for Data Formats. And that's all we need for now, our name and our source and target data models. Then we'll save that. And I'll move across to the format. If we look on the left-hand side, you'll notice that we have a list of source data entities and a list of target data entities. When we created the data format, we chose a single data model for our source data and the same data model for our target data entities. And that's why we're seeing the same data entities in each. If you're working with a more complex project where you had lots of data entities, you could separate these entities into different data models. So you could, for example, have all your source data entities in a single model and your target data entities in another model, or you may wish to have all your file entities in one and your database tables in another, as an example. In this case, we have the same in both, but the only one we're interested in as our source data is the sales data spreadsheet, which is listed here as sales data D1. It's the name of that spreadsheet in our data model. So we'll bring that in first of all, and you'll see a list of all the columns included in the spreadsheet from our import that we did to the data model. And next I'm going to bring across the sales reference table that we have on the database that we will be using as a way of normalizing this data. And we can map across the details now from the sales. So we'll bring the customer ID across to the customer ID, the date across to the date, the product ID across to the product ID, quantity across to quantity, and the sales ID across, that's the salesperson, across to the sales ID. And now when we process or run this data format, what it will do is for every row that is processed in the sales data, it will move the customer ID, the date, product ID, quantity and sales ID for that row across to the sales table in the database, and only that detail will be moved across until it has processed all the rows in the sales data. So we've given ourselves access to the data, both the spreadsheet on the file system and the tables in the database. We've created a data model to include all entities, the spreadsheet and the 4 tables in the database. We've created, or we are working on the data format, and at this stage we have mapped the sales data only to the sales table at this stage. Our next step, and I'm going to be coming back to the data format because we will be normalizing the data in there shortly, but we're going to move across to the pipeline so we can see what we have done so far actually processing the data. So the next step is to move across to create the pipeline. Pipelines, and we'll add a new pipeline. We'll give that a name. I'll call it data format training. I'll save that. and we'll move to the editor window. I'll widen this up a bit here. Now remember, the pipeline is the area where we're going to control the process and the order of the process and instructions for that data. So the first thing we're going to need to do is we're going to need to get that spreadsheet. So I'm going to type in the word get, and we'll notice there's an option here under storage, get storage item. That's what I'm after. I'm going to drag that into my editor window, and as soon as I highlight it, I'll be given some options on the right hand side here, and one of them is the storage location. So I'm going to change that to the storage location we created, which is UP training, and the folder that that item is stored in is the sales folder. That is all we need to add into the get storage item settings. I'm going to save that. We're also able to rename this node with any name that fits with the project there. So anything that makes sense to you, and you can give a description over here as well, which is useful. You'll notice that since I've saved that, we've been given a start and an end node have been added with the item in between here. This is the only item we've added so far. So if we run this, we can see that it is able to get the item correctly. We'll see if it processes correctly. And we'll see that there's a green tick showing that it's happy, it was able to get the item. If we go to the context, there's one item that's been processed here, get storage item. If we look at count, it's one. There was only one file there. We go to files, we can see some detail of the file there as well. The next step is to read that file. So if I'm going to type in read here, if I look at my connectors, the one I'm after is read delimited. This is a CSV document, and the read delimited node will allow us to read all the details in those rows and columns. I'm going to include that as the second process. And if I highlight that, we'll see we have some options for that as well. Things like field delimiter, which at the moment is set correctly. Use header row, yes, we've got as true there. Sorry, there it is there. Use header row true. The next thing we need to do is we need to include a bind, and this will tell each of these nodes how to process the data between each other. So if I highlight the bind node, you'll see we have the get storage item located here. We want to get the file from that location, and we want to read that file. So I'm going to push the file into the read delimited. So those are the two settings I need on the bind. I'm going to save that, and we can run this again. And see that we are happy that everything is processed correctly. So we can see the green tick, it shows that it is able to load or get the storage item, and it was able to read the file. So if we have a look now at the context, and we look at the read delimited, we can see here there's a number of items that it was able to read, and these are in the platform's data format, which is a key value pair. But we can see that it was able to read that data. So that's processing correctly. The next step is to include the data mapping. So I'm going to type in the word map. Map data is one of them that comes up here. I'm just going to move that down a bit. It's the next item we want to process, next order of the items. I'm going to highlight that, and we'll see the option here is data format. Now that's the data format we created. We called it a training data format, so we need to include that, and there is nothing else we need to worry about there. I'm going to click save. I will need to include a bind. So I'll bring a bind across. So we want to take the, if I highlight the bind, we want to take the data from the read delimited and push that data into the map data. So it's going to be data from read limited to data of map data, and save that. Now just going back to the map data, you'll see the data format as we selected it is for training data formats. And if we go back and have a look there, you'll remember at this stage we have mapped only the sales reference table to the sales data. So we'll leave that like that for now and move back here. And again, we can run this. And we can see that it was able to run that successfully. So we're happy that it's able to process everything we've included so far. And again, we can see it was able to get the storage item, read the data, and map the data. And if we have a look there, we'll see some items here that will match up to the table on the database that was mapped. Now the last thing we need to do is we need to save this map data to the database. So we're going to have to include a save. And if we look at the connectors, there is a save connector for our UP training database here. So I'm going to drop that onto the edit, and that'll be my next item. Next item to process. Save, and if I highlight save, it needs to reference a data model, and you can remember that the data model includes all the entities we're working with, and one of those entities will be this sales reference table. So if we look at our training for data formats, data model, include that there, it will then be able to save to that table. And we include a bind. Highlight the bind, and we'll be taking the data from the map data, and that will take that data to the save, which will save it to the database. And that completes the process. I'm going to save this. I'll just go across quickly to the database, and we'll have a look. We don't need that row for now. We'll have a look at all these tables, and they should be empty. And they are. I'll move back to the pipeline, and I'm going to run the pipeline. And what we're expecting to see now is the sales reference table being populated by the data from the spreadsheet. We can see that that is processed correctly without any errors. We'll move across to the database, and we will run the query on those tables, and we can see that the sales table now has, it should have 30 rows of data as per the spreadsheet, and it does. So we're happy with that. Now if we go back and look at our data format again, so far we have mapped to the sales table, and this sales reference table included all data from the spreadsheet. Now our next step in the process is to include a customer reference, product reference, and salesperson's reference table that will not include all data. So I'm going to bring those across now. I'll bring the customer, the product, and the salesperson table across, and we'll map the items across to each of those. For the product, we'll have the description, product ID, unit price, and for the salesperson we have their email address, first name, last name, and their sales ID, which is the salesperson from that row there. I'm just going to move this around to make it look a bit more visually pleasant. Alright, now what we are wanting to achieve here is we are wanting a reference to all the items from the sales data spreadsheet to be recorded in the sales reference table, and only one of each customer to be stored in the customer table, one of each product, and one of each salesperson. And how we're going to achieve that is by moving back to our data model, and we're going to go through each of those items that we need to normalize. So I'm going to highlight the product table, and I'll move across to constraints. And we're going to add an external constraint to the product table. I'm going to add that. It's an external key. So I've given it a name, I've told it what type it is, and then I'm going to switch on the unique columns that will make this a unique product ID. So if we look at this, for the product, the description and price will make it a unique product ID. So there'll only ever be one description and price per product ID. So I'm going to add description, and I'm going to add unit price. And I'm going to save that. The same for customer. I'm going to highlight customer, move ahead to the constraints tab, add an external constraint for customer. I'm just giving it a name here. Tell it what type it is. It's an external key. I'm going to show it which columns are unique. And for every customer ID that's unique, it'll be the contact details, the address, the name, and the region. So that is what makes it unique, when all of those match. I'm going to save that. I move to salesperson. Constraints, add an external for salesperson. It's an external key. Switch on unique and show it which columns are unique. So the first name, last name, and email address is what makes a salesperson unique. And I'm going to save that. Okay, so now we've included constraints for those three tables in our data model. Move back here. When we process this now, we're hoping that all data from the spreadsheet moves across to the sales reference table, and only unique customers, unique products, and unique salespeople referencing their sales ID, product ID, and customer ID will be included in those three tables. First thing I'll need to do before we run this pipeline is just clear the tables in the database. So I need to delete the sales table, make sure these are all clear. They are. Move back to my pipeline. Now we've changed the mapping, so when the process gets to map the data, it will reference the training data formats as the data map, which is this one, and it will now map all the tables. I'll move back there, and we will click run and let that process. And we'll see that that is processed that successfully. I'll now move back to the database, and let's have a look at all of these tables. And we can see that the sales table should have the 30 rows of information, which it does. We have a look at the products. They currently have 20 rows, so they've only got unique ones. Customer as well, sitting with 20 at the moment. And the sales ID, that'll have unique sales IDs there. If we look at the sales and our order by, Let's say sales ID. We can see that there are duplicates here in the original sales. So for example, sales ID 11 has 2, but if we look at the salesperson for the ID 11, we can see there is only 1 that has gone through there, so it has done its job of normalizing correctly. So there we have it. We have taken data from a spreadsheet, we've recorded all the sales in a sales reference table, and we have normalized the customer, the product, and the salesperson into their own reference tables. And that concludes this training video, an introduction to data models and data formats. Thank you for listening.